Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The stillness of dawn in the Ozark Mountains carries secrets that the mist refuses to reveal. In 1869, nestled in the remote hollows of Shannon County, Missouri, stood a peculiar residence known locally as the Whitfield Manor. What made this structure remarkable wasn't its architecture, though that would later become the subject of much speculation, but rather the 7 identical windows that lined its eastern facade, each perfectly spaced, each identical in shape and size, each supposedly built for one of Jeremiah Whitfield's 7 adult daughters. The Whitfield case remains one of the most disturbing incidents recorded in Missouri's history, not for what was discovered, but for what remained perpetually hidden. County records indicate that Jeremiah Whitfield, a formerly wealthy merchant from St. Louis, arrived in the area in 1862, purchasing nearly 300 acres of isolated woodland along what is now Route 19, approximately 12 miles south of the town of Eminence. According to the Shannon County Register, dated April 18, 1862, Whitfield came accompanied by 7 women, all introduced as his daughters. Their names were recorded as Elizabeth Catherine, Margaret Josephine, Rebecca, Virginia, and Sophia Whitfield. What struck the county clerk, as noted in his personal journal discovered decades later, was that all 7 women appeared to be of similar age, somewhere between 25 and 35 years old. None were married, unusual for women of that era, and all dressed identically in high-necked gray dresses. When questioned about his wife, Whitfield reportedly stated she had returned to the earth, a statement interpreted as widowhood. The land Whitfield purchased was largely considered worthless by locals. Rocky terrain with poor soil for farming, dense woods, and a small creek prone to flooding during spring rains. Yet Whitfield paid a handsome sum and immediately began construction of what would become known as the 7-windowed house. Amos Breedlove, the closest neighbor living some 2 miles away, described the construction in a letter to his brother in 1863. The peculiarity of the structure cannot be overstated. The eastern wall contains 7 identical windows, evenly spaced, as if to allow the morning sun to penetrate 7 identical rooms. Whitfield supervises every aspect of the construction himself, becoming agitated when workers deviate from his precise instructions. The daughters are rarely seen, and when they appear, they move in absolute silence. Local craftsmen hired for the construction later reported unusual specifications for the windows themselves. Each had to be precisely the same dimensions, exactly 42 inches wide by 63 inches tall. The glass panes had to be imported from a specific manufacturer in Boston at considerable expense. Most peculiar was Whitfield's insistence that each window be installed at a slightly different angle, differences so subtle they were barely perceptible to the naked eye. Yet he measured each repeatedly with specialized instruments, making minute adjustments until satisfied. By winter of 1863, the house was completed, a large 2-story structure of local stone and timber positioned on a small rise overlooking the creek. The most notable feature, as mentioned, was the eastern wall with its 7 windows. Local rumors suggested that behind each window was a separate bedroom, one for each daughter, though no one from the surrounding area was ever invited inside to confirm this. For the next 6 years, the Whitfield family lived in almost complete isolation. Their only contact with the nearest town of Eminence came once a month, when Jeremiah would arrive by wagon to purchase supplies. Shopkeepers noted that his list always included 7 of everything: 7 bars of soap, 7 pairs of gloves, 7 spools of thread. When questioned about his daughters, Whitfield would respond simply that they were engaged in their devotions, leading some to believe the family belonged to some unusual religious sect. Thomas Ledbetter, proprietor of the general store in Eminence from 1860 to 1875, kept detailed records of all transactions, a common practice for merchants of the era who often extended credit to customers. His ledgers, preserved in the Shannon County Historical Society, show Whitfield's purchases becoming increasingly peculiar over time. Initially, they consisted of normal household items, food staples, cloth, basic tools. By 1865, the lists included specialized astronomical instruments, large quantities of candles, uncommon herbs such as belladonna and wolfsbane, and books shipped from as far away as Europe, with titles recorded in Latin. Ledbetter's personal notes, scribbled in the margins of his ledgers, express growing concern. Mr. Whitfield's manner grows more agitated with each visit. His hands tremble when conducting business. He speaks of astronomical conjunctions and stellar alignments, claiming the position of the Pleiades holds special significance. When asked directly about the welfare of his daughters, he becomes evasive, stating only that their education progresses according to the celestial schedule. What makes this case particularly unsettling is that during those 6 years, no one reported ever seeing all 7 daughters simultaneously. In fact, most locals would report seeing no more than 2 at any given time, always maintaining a distance from others, never speaking. Dr. Ellsworth Jensen, the county physician, noted in his records from 1865 that he was called to the property to treat Miss Whitfield for a severe fever. When he arrived, he was not permitted inside the main house, but instead directed to a small outbuilding where one of the daughters lay ill. In his medical journal, Jensen wrote, "The patient refused to speak, communicating only through nods. Most disturbing was the discovery of unusual ligature marks around her wrists, as if she had been recently bound. When questioned about these marks, the father dismissed them as the result of devotional practices." Jensen attempted to speak privately with the woman, but Whitfield never left them alone. When the doctor suggested she might recover better in town, where he could monitor her condition, Whitfield became agitated, insisting she must remain near her window for recovery. Jensen administered what treatment he could and left, troubled by the interaction. In a letter to a medical colleague in St. Louis, discovered in 1962, Jensen confessed his suspicions. "I fear something unwholesome transpires at the Whitfield property." The young woman's condition suggested not just physical illness, but a profound melancholy. Her eyes held the vacant look I have observed in patients at the state asylum. Most concerning was her reaction when her father mentioned the approaching alignment. A visible trembling overtook her entire body. 3 months after this visit, Jensen himself disappeared, while reportedly traveling to consult on a case in a neighboring county. His horse and medical bag were found along the road, but no trace of the doctor was ever discovered. Though no direct connection to the Whitfield family was ever established, local suspicion fell naturally upon the mysterious household. In October 1866, a surveying party from the county assessor's office approached the Whitfield property to update land records. Their official report contains a brief but disturbing observation. Upon nearing the property, we observed 7 female figures standing in a perfect circle in a clearing near the house. Each wore identical gray dresses and stood with arms outstretched toward the center of the circle where Mr. Whitfield appeared to be taking measurements with a sextant. Upon noticing our approach, the group quickly dispersed, the women returning to the house while Whitfield came to intercept us. He was adamant that we not proceed further on to his property, claiming a celestial alignment in progress could not be disturbed. When questioned about the nature of this alignment, he spoke incoherently about the 7 Sisters constellation and a terrestrial mirror he was creating. Due to his agitated state and our discomfort with the situation, we completed our assessment from the property boundary. More curious still were the purchases Jeremiah began making in 1867. Hardware store receipts discovered during later investigations show orders for unusual amounts of chains, locks, and something listed only as restraints. When the store owner questioned these purchases, Whitfield explained they were necessary for keeping the wilderness at bay. The wilderness, many would later speculate, may not have been the forests surrounding the property. Silas Humphrey, the blacksmith who fulfilled several of Whitfield's orders for custom metalwork during this period, provided a deposition in 1870 during the posthumous investigation. According to Humphrey, Whitfield commissioned 7 identical sets of iron brackets, each designed to be mounted to a stone wall and equipped with locking mechanisms. When asked their purpose, Whitfield explained they were for mounting astronomical instruments that needed to be precisely positioned and secured. Humphrey noted that the design seemed ill-suited for such a purpose, but completed the work as requested. In 1868, Whitfield's behavior grew increasingly erratic during his infrequent visits to town. Several accounts describe him muttering to himself about approaching alignment and the sisters reaching perfect harmony. The local minister, Reverend Isaiah Pembroke, recorded in his personal journal an unsettling encounter. Encountered Mr. Whitfield after services today. Though he did not attend worship, he waited outside the church, seemingly eager to discuss theological matters. When I suggested such notions bordered on paganism, he became agitated, declaring that science and divinity are merely different languages describing the same cosmic order. Most concerning was his statement that his daughters were being prepared as vessels for celestial essence, and that each had a designated window through which the transformation would occur. I encouraged him to bring his family to Sunday services, but he laughed unnervingly, saying they were already engaged in more significant worship. By early 1869, locals had begun to notice something even more unsettling. His discourse was most disturbing. He spoke of ancient stellar religions and inquired whether I believed the heavens could confer immortality if properly aligned with earthly vessels. The number of women accompanying Jeremiah on his rare visits to town had dwindled. Where once he might bring 2 daughters, now he came alone. When asked directly about his family by the postmaster in February 1869, Whitfield reportedly replied, "My daughters remain at home where they belong. Each has her window, and each must remain true to her purpose." During the spring and summer of 1869, Whitfield made several large purchases that, in retrospect, suggest preparation for a significant event. In May, he acquired large quantities of white candles, specific herbs known for their use in ceremonial practices, and 7 identical white dresses from a seamstress in the neighboring town of West Plains, providing unusually precise measurements for each. In July, he ordered a specialized telescope from a scientific supply company in Chicago, paying a premium for expedited delivery. Most notably, in August 1869, he visited a jeweler in Springfield, commissioning 7 identical silver medallions, each engraved with what the jeweler later described as an unusual astronomical chart centered on the Pleiades constellation. A letter found among Whitfield's possessions after his death, never sent but addressed to an unnamed colleague at Harvard University, provides a disturbing glimpse into his deteriorating mental state. The alignment approaches. My calculations confirm that on September 13th, the conjunction will be perfect. The terrestrial 7 and the celestial 7 will align precisely at dawn. The vessels are prepared, though some have required more rigorous conditioning than others. Occasional resistance was anticipated and has been overcome. The windows are positioned with mathematical precision, each refracting the light at the specific angle required to activate the corresponding stellar energy. When the transformation occurs, I shall achieve what no astronomer has ever accomplished, the perfect marriage of heavenly bodies with earthly vessels. Immortality through stellar communion. On the evening of September 12, 1869, a severe storm swept through the Ozarks. Lightning struck several properties in Shannon County, including the distant Whitfield house. Amos Breedlove, seeing the flames from his property, rode through the downpour to offer assistance. What he discovered would become the foundation of one of Missouri's most disturbing historical accounts. According to Breedlove's sworn statement to the Shannon County Sheriff, recorded on September 14, 1869, upon approaching the Whitfield property, I observed flames consuming the eastern portion of the house. The 7 windows were clearly visible, illuminated by the fire behind them. I called out, receiving no response. Upon entering through the unlocked front door, I discovered the main portion of the house to be eerily empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, as if no one had been living there. The eastern section, however, contained 7 identical rooms, each accessible only through a heavy door from the main hallway, each with a window facing the sunrise. 6 of the rooms were empty save for a single wooden chair positioned directly before the window. The 7th contained the body of Jeremiah Whitfield, seated in his chair facing the window, his back to the door. The cause of death appeared to be a deep laceration across the throat. Breedlove's testimony continues with details initially omitted from official reports, but later discovered in his personal journal. What the official record does not reflect is the state of Whitfield's body beyond the fatal wound. His eyes were open, fixed in an expression of rapturous expectation rather than terror. More disturbing were the 7 distinct symbols carved into his forehead, crude representations of stars and what I recognized as the pattern of the Pleiades. Most unsettling of all was the discovery that each of the 7 room doors could only be locked from the outside, with no interior mechanism for opening them. Yet all stood open, their locks apparently untouched. Most disturbing of all was what was not found. There was no trace of any of the 7 daughters. No bodies were discovered in the fire's aftermath, no evidence of their departure, no indication of where they might have gone. It was as if they had simply vanished, leaving only the 7 windows as evidence they had ever existed at all. The subsequent investigation raised more questions than it answered. County records showed no birth certificates for any of the Whitfield daughters. Inquiries to St. Louis, where Jeremiah had allegedly lived previously, returned no evidence of his having had a family there. The property deed, examined closely after his death, listed the owner not as Jeremiah Whitfield, but as the 7 Sisters Trust, a legal entity that could not be traced to any known organization. Further examination of the property revealed other disturbing details. In a small outbuilding that had escaped the fire, investigators discovered what appeared to be an astronomical laboratory. The room contained sophisticated telescopes, celestial charts, and 7 identical silver pendulums, each suspended above a circular stone embedded with different minerals. A leather-bound journal found in this outbuilding contained thousands of calculations, tracking the movements of the Pleiades constellation with obsessive precision. The final entry, dated September 12, 1869, contained a single sentence: "Dawn brings transcendence." The mystery deepened when investigators discovered a hidden cellar beneath the eastern wing of the house. Sheriff's reports describe 7 small chambers, each directly beneath one of the 7 windows above. Each chamber contained evidence of long-term occupation: a narrow bed, a chamber pot, minimal personal effects. Most disturbing were the chains affixed to the wall of each chamber, showing signs of regular use. This discovery led to the obvious and horrifying conclusion that the 7 daughters had not been Whitfield's family at all, but women held against their will. Yet this theory, too, had its contradictions. No reports of 7 missing women had been filed in Missouri or surrounding states during the period in question. The women had been seen occasionally in town, walking freely, seemingly uncoerced. And if they were captives, what explained their apparent disappearance before the fire? Shannon County Sheriff James McCready, leading the investigation, noted in his official report a detail that troubled him significantly. Each of the underground chambers contained a journal, apparently maintained by its occupant. Most pages had been deliberately removed, leaving only scattered entries that paint a confusing picture. Some entries suggest a voluntary participation in what is referred to as the Great Work, or the alignment. Others contain what appear to be desperate pleas for release. Most disturbing is that the handwriting within individual journals changes dramatically over time, beginning with educated, refined script and deteriorating into almost childlike scrawls. This suggests either a severe mental deterioration or potentially that different individuals occupied the same chambers at different times. The investigation was hampered by the isolated nature of the location and the limited forensic techniques available in 1869. After 3 weeks, with no bodies found and no clear evidence of foul play beyond Whitfield's own death, which some suggested might have been suicide, the case was officially classified as death by misadventure with suspicious circumstances. The property was abandoned, the remains of the house left to decay in the remote valley. For nearly a century, the case remained a disturbing but largely forgotten piece of local history. Then, in 1957, during the construction of a Forestry Service road through the former Whitfield property, workers uncovered a metal box buried approximately 3 feet below ground, at the location where the eastern wall of the house would have stood. Inside was a journal, its author unidentified, though handwriting analysis would later suggest it had been written by a woman educated in the 1850s or 1860s. The journal, now preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, contains only 7 entries, each dated September 1st from 1863 through 1869. Each entry contains the same disturbing message, though the handwriting grows increasingly erratic over the years. I sit at my window and watch for the dawn. He says when the right day comes, the light will set us free. My sisters sleep in darkness. It is my turn to watch. I alone am trusted with the light today. Tomorrow belongs to another. We take our turns, we keep our silence, we wait for the day of perfect alignment. The final entry, dated September 1st, 1869, just 11 days before the fire, reads, "The waiting ends with the harvest moon. 7 windows, 7 sisters, 7 sacrifices made, 7 sacrifices required in return. He believes he will transcend. We know better. The sunrise will bring a different transformation altogether. The key has been turned. We have learned patience in our windowless rooms below. Now we will teach him darkness in return." Dr. Eleanor Prentice, who analyzed the journal for the Historical Society in 1958, noted several peculiarities about the document. The ink used for each annual entry shows subtle differences in composition, consistent with the claim that each was written exactly 1 year apart. More unusual is the paper itself. Each entry is written on a different type of paper, yet bound together as if collected from various sources. Most telling is the analysis of fingerprints preserved in the oils on the pages. Preliminary testing indicates at least 5 distinct individuals handled these pages extensively, supporting the theory that multiple women contributed to what appears, at first glance, to be a single author's journal. In 1962, Dr. Harold Mackenzie, then a professor of anthropology at the University of Missouri, became interested in the Whitfield case. After examining the available evidence, including land surveys of the property, he made a discovery that added another layer to the already disturbing narrative. The 7 windows had been constructed with peculiar precision. When plotted on a map and connected to various geographical features on the property, a distinctive boulder, an unusual tree formation, a bend in the creek, they formed a pattern reminiscent of the Pleiades constellation, also known as the 7 Sisters. Mackenzie's research didn't stop with geographical alignments. Working with astronomers from the university, he conducted a thorough analysis of Whitfield's astronomical calculations found in the outbuilding. What emerged was evidence of an obsession with a specific astronomical event, a moment when the Pleiades constellation would align perfectly with the eastern horizon at dawn, visible through the 7 windows in a particular sequence as the Earth rotated. Such an event, the astronomers confirmed, would occur only once every 28 years at that precise location. More significant was Mackenzie's discovery regarding the positioning of the house itself. Using astronomical calculations, He determined that on the morning of September 13, 1869, the day after the fire, the sun would have risen in perfect alignment with the central window of the seven. This astronomical event would occur only once every 28 years at that precise location. Such cults were known to exist in intellectual circles of the mid-19th century, particularly among those interested in what was then called celestial divination. In Mackenzie's 1963 paper, Astronomical Obsession and Ritual Imprisonment, the Whitfield Case, he proposed a disturbing theory. The evidence suggests Whitfield believed he could achieve some form of transcendence or immortality by creating a perfect terrestrial reflection of the Pleiades constellation, using 7 women as vessels for what he perceived as celestial energy. Mackenzie theorized that Whitfield may have belonged to an obscure astronomical cult, possibly connected to certain esoteric European traditions that viewed the Pleiades as having mystical significance. The windows were not merely symbolic, but functional, designed to capture specific stellar light at the moment of perfect alignment. The underground chambers likely served as places of purification or preparation, where the women were kept between their scheduled observations at the windows above. The rotating nature of their duties, as suggested by the recovered journal, indicates Whitfield had developed an elaborate ritual system, possibly believing that each woman needed to be attuned to a specific star in the constellation. Mackenzie's paper caused considerable controversy in academic circles, with many dismissing his theories as speculative. However, subsequent discoveries would lend credence to his more disturbing conclusions. The identity of the 7 women remained a mystery until 1965, when an archivist at the Massachusetts State Library discovered a connection while cataloging the papers of the defunct Northfield Academy for Young Ladies. 7 students and 1 astronomy professor had disappeared from the academy in 1861, presumably eloping together, causing a minor scandal. The names of the 7 young women did not match those of the Whitfield daughters, but physical descriptions were strikingly similar. Most telling was a group photograph showing the 7 students posed around their professor, identified as Jeremiah Whitcomb, not Whitfield, each holding an astronomical instrument. The inscription on the back read, "The Pleiades Circle, 1861. May our studies of the heavens elevate us beyond our earthly constraints." Academy records indicated that Whitcomb had been dismissed from his position in early 1861 after concerns arose about his unorthodox teachings and inappropriate closeness with a select group of students. His lectures had reportedly devolved from standard astronomy to discussions of stellar consciousness and the divine nature of celestial bodies. One faculty complaint, dated January 1861, expressed concern that Professor Whitcomb has abandoned scientific rigor in favor of mystical speculation, claiming the Pleiades cluster contains the secret to transcending human limitations. Several impressionable students have become devoted to these theories, forming what amounts to a cult of personality around him. If Whitcomb and Whitfield were indeed the same person, it suggests that what began as an academic astronomical society may have devolved into something far more sinister over time. What would cause an educated man to isolate himself and 7 former students in the remote Ozark wilderness, constructing a house with such specific celestial alignments, eventually imprisoning the women in underground chambers? The answer may lie in the final pieces of evidence uncovered in 1968. During an unusually severe drought, the creek running through the former Whitfield property dried up completely, revealing a series of stone markers embedded in the creek bed, normally hidden by water. County authorities excavated the area and discovered the remains of 7 female bodies buried in a circular pattern around a central point. Forensic examination, limited by the technology of the time, estimated the remains to have been buried for many decades, consistent with the Whitfield timeline. Dr. Marcus Hollingsworth, the forensic pathologist who examined the remains, noted several disturbing details in his report. Each skeleton was positioned facing outward from the central point, arms outstretched as if in supplication. More disturbing was the discovery that each skull contained a small, precisely drilled hole in the exact same location, the center of the forehead. These holes appear to have been made pre-mortem using a specialized tool. Each body also wore an identical silver medallion around the neck, engraved with a different star from the Pleiades constellation. Most significant was the discovery that each grave contained a different mineral deposit: iron ore, copper, silver, gold, mercury, tin, and lead, the 7 metals traditionally associated with celestial bodies in ancient astronomy. The position of the burials matched precisely with the pattern Mackenzie had identified, connecting the 7 windows to landscape features. If one were to stand at the center of this circle of graves, on the morning of September 13th, the sun would rise directly over the central window of the house, now long destroyed. Most disturbing of all was what a Forestry Service aerial survey revealed in 1968. When photographed from above during the drought, the entire landscape surrounding the former Whitfield property, the positioning of the house foundation, the creek, certain rock formations, and the burial sites, formed a perfect replica of the Pleiades constellation. Some features were natural, others had clearly been modified by human hands. The entire property had been transformed into a terrestrial mirror of the celestial formation. This discovery prompted a more thorough examination of Whitfield's astronomical journals. Cryptographers from the University of Missouri identified a code embedded within the seemingly random calculations, a series of instructions for performing what Whitfield termed the alignment ritual. The decoded text described a ceremony to be performed at dawn on September 13, 1869, involving 7 women positioned at 7 windows, each reciting different astronomical calculations as the light of the rising sun passed through the glass. The ritual's purpose was described as creating a conduit between flesh and star, allowing Whitfield to ascend to the celestial plane through the gateway of sacrifice. The case was officially closed in 1969, exactly 100 years after the events at Whitfield Manor. The official conclusion was that Jeremiah Whitfield, or Whitcomb, had indeed abducted the 7 women from the Massachusetts Academy, possibly with their initial cooperation, and established an isolated compound for astronomical observations of an apparently ritualistic nature. Over time, their circumstances had deteriorated from academic colleagues to prisoners. The evidence suggested the women had eventually killed Whitfield, set fire to the house, and either fled or, more likely given the burial discoveries, died on the property, their bodies hidden by an unknown party. Yet questions remain. If the women died, who buried them in such a precise pattern? If they escaped, why were no traces of them ever found? And what explained the meticulous astronomical alignments that would have taken years to plan and execute? Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a historian specializing in 19th century esoteric movements, proposed a theory in her 1972 analysis of the case. The evidence suggests a tragic evolution from intellectual exploration to psychological manipulation and eventual imprisonment. Whitcomb likely began as a charismatic professor with unorthodox ideas that attracted dedicated students. The isolated Ozarks setting provided perfect conditions for what modern psychology would identify as classic cult dynamics: separation from family and society, increasing control over daily activities, and the gradual normalization of extreme behaviors. The astronomical obsession served as both the justification for and method of control. What remains unexplained is the apparent sophistication of Whitfield's astronomical knowledge. His calculations for the 28-year alignment cycle were remarkably accurate for the period, suggesting genuine astronomical skill perverted toward disturbing ends. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the case comes from a note found paper-clipped to the Whitfield file in the Shannon County Sheriff's Archives in 1969. Written in faded ink on the back of a deputy's calling card was a single observation. Visited Old Whitfield Place at dawn, September 13, 1897. Could have sworn I saw 7 women standing in a circle in the mist where the house used to stand. When I approached, they were gone. Exactly 28 years since the fire. We'll return in 1925 to see if they appear again. The deputy who wrote this note was identified as Thomas Breedlove, son of the Amos Breedlove, who discovered Whitfield's body. According to county employment records, Thomas served as a deputy from 1892 to 1914, when he resigned his position without explanation. His personal journal, donated to the Historical Society by his granddaughter in 1970, contains additional details about his 1897 visit to the Whitfield property. The morning was unusually misty, the sun just breaking the horizon. As I approached the ruins of the eastern wall, I observed what appeared to be 7 female figures arranged in a circle where the house once stood. They wore what seemed to be white dresses, though the mist made details difficult to discern. Most disturbing was their stance. Each had one arm extended toward the center of the circle, where a shaft of sunlight penetrated the mist precisely through what would have been the central window. As I called out, the figures seemed to dissolve into the mist itself. I searched the area thoroughly, but found no footprints or evidence of human presence. The precision with which the sunlight aligned with the former window location, however, was undeniable. No record exists of whether this deputy kept his appointment with the sunrise in 1925. By astronomical calculation, the next perfect alignment would have occurred in 1953, then again in 1981, and most recently in 2009. Hikers and amateur astronomers occasionally make the journey to the site, now part of the Mark Twain National Forest, for each 28-year conjunction. None have reported seeing 7 women in the dawn mist, but several have described the unsettling sensation of being watched from windows that no longer exist. In 1953, a graduate student in astronomy from the University of Missouri, Robert Kellerman, camped at the Whitfield site to observe the alignment. His field notes, preserved in the university archives, describe an unusual phenomenon. At precisely 6:17 a.m., as the sun crested the eastern ridge, the light struck the remains of the central window frame at a perfect angle. For approximately 42 seconds, the sunlight created what appeared to be a luminous pathway from the window to the center of what would have been the house. Most remarkable was the behavior of the local wildlife during this brief interval. Complete silence fell over the forest, followed by the sudden flight of every bird within hearing distance. Temperature readings showed an inexplicable drop of 7 degrees Fahrenheit during those 42 seconds, returning to normal immediately afterward. The foundation stones of the Whitfield house can still be found by those willing to hike several miles off the marked trails. The eastern wall is the best preserved, with 7 evenly spaced gaps where windows once admitted the rising sun. Local folklore claims that if you place your head within one of these empty frames at dawn, you can hear a woman's voice whispering astronomical calculations, counting down to some future date of perfect alignment. Forest Ranger Wilson Carpenter, who patrolled the area from 1975 to 1998, documented several unusual incidents at the site in his official reports. In 1981, coinciding with the 28-year alignment cycle, he noted, responded to reports of unusual lights at the old Whitfield ruins. Upon arrival before dawn, observed no artificial lights, but noted an unusual atmospheric phenomenon. 7 distinct columns of mist rising from the ground where the eastern wall once stood. As the sun rose, each column appeared to refract the light differently, momentarily creating a rainbow effect. A subsequent investigation revealed no chemical agents or environmental factors that could explain the phenomenon. The site has been officially closed to the public since 1978, after several hikers reported experiencing extreme disorientation and memory gaps after visiting the 7 windows. Forest Service records attribute these incidents to possible exposure to limestone dust or fungal spores disturbed at the ruins, though no definitive explanation was ever confirmed. Unofficially, Local rangers acknowledge keeping a particular watch on the area every 28 years, when interest in the site typically increases. In 1977, prior to the closure, psychology professor Helen Winters brought a group of students to the site as part of a study on the power of suggestion and local folklore. The study was abruptly terminated when 3 participants experienced what Winters described in her aborted research paper as acute environmental psychosis, a sudden onset of identical delusions involving being called to stand at a specific window and wait for the light. All 3 affected students recovered within 48 hours of leaving the site, but reported no memory of their experiences during the episode. Winters noted that all 3 had been standing directly in front of different window openings when the symptoms began. The Missouri Historical Society maintains a collection of artifacts recovered from the Whitfield property, including fragments of astronomical instruments, surveyors' tools, and 7 identical silver lockets, each containing what appears to be a different pressed flower. The lockets were discovered in 1968, buried beneath each of the 7 windows, suggesting they had been deliberately placed there during the home's construction. Each flower has been identified as belonging to a species that opens its blooms at a specific hour of the day or night, collectively covering a full 24-hour cycle, a botanical clock of sorts. Curator Emmett Richardson, who cataloged these items in 1970, reported an unusual incident. While photographing the 7 lockets, all 7 flowers simultaneously crumbled to dust, despite having been preserved for over a century. More disturbing was the discovery, after development of the photographs, that each image contained an inexplicable light anomaly, a small star-like illumination appearing to hover over each flower. Equipment malfunction was ruled out, as the patterns matched the arrangement of the Pleiades constellation. The journal discovered in 1957 remains the most enigmatic piece of evidence. Analysis of the paper and ink confirms its authenticity as a 19th century document, but certain peculiarities have never been explained. The most significant is that under ultraviolet light, a previously invisible notation appears in the margins of the final entry. Written in what appears to be a different hand from the main text, it reads simply, "The next alignment brings the 8th window. We will return when the circle is complete. 2037. This cryptic message gained unexpected significance in 1980 when astronomers using improved telescopic technology confirmed that the Pleiades cluster contains not just 7 major stars, but hundreds, with 8 particularly prominent members. The traditional 7 sisters of classical astronomy failed to account for an 8th star clearly visible to modern instruments. Some astronomers suggested this discrepancy might be explained by one star having significantly dimmed over the past few thousand years, a stellar event that would have been imperceptible during a human lifetime, but might have been recorded in ancient astronomical observations. In 1985, Dr. Rachel Steinman, conducting research for her book on astronomical cults, visited the Missouri Historical Society to examine the Whitfield materials. Her research notes describe an unsettling experience. While reviewing the original journal under controlled lighting conditions, I observed what appeared to be text fading in and out of visibility on several pages, different content from what was normally visible. This phantom text appeared to be written in a mathematical cipher similar to but distinct from the one used in Whitfield's astronomical journals. When I attempted to photograph these pages, no evidence of the secondary text appeared in the images. The phenomenon occurred only between 3:17 and 3:24 p.m., corresponding precisely to the time when sunlight through the archives window fell directly on the document. As with many historical mysteries from the remote regions of the Ozarks, the full truth of the 7-windowed house may never be known. Records from that era are incomplete, witnesses long deceased, and the landscape itself transformed by more than a century of natural growth and erosion. What remains is a disturbing convergence of evidence suggesting that something beyond conventional understanding occurred at the Whitfield property, something involving 7 women, 7 windows, and a man obsessed with aligning the heavens and earth. The Whitfield case resurfaced briefly in academic circles in 1992 when Dr. Josephine Mercer published a controversial paper suggesting a direct connection between the Whitfield astronomical calculations and certain medieval alchemical texts. According to Mercer, Whitfield's journals contained references to obscure manuscripts dealing with the transmutation of stellar energy into corporeal form, essentially the belief that celestial bodies could be channeled into human vessels through precise astronomical alignments. This concept, while dismissed by modern science, had adherents among certain esoteric circles in 19th century Europe, particularly in German and Austrian astronomical societies with which Whitfield may have corresponded. Mercer's research identified several European astronomers who disappeared from academic records in the 1850s, possibly having emigrated to America to pursue theories rejected by mainstream science. One such figure, Wilhelm Krauss of the Vienna Observatory, published a series of papers between 1851 and 1853 proposing that stellar consciousness could be communicated to human recipients under specific conditions. After facing ridicule from his colleagues, Krauss resigned his position and vanished from historical record. Mercer's comparison of Krauss's known writings with Whitfield's journals revealed striking similarities in both theoretical approach and handwriting, suggesting they may have been the same individual. One final note of interest: in 1957, the same year the buried journal was discovered, astronomers at the Mount Palomar Observatory in California announced the confirmation of an 8th star in the Pleiades cluster, previously too faint to be consistently observed. While modern astronomy now recognizes hundreds of stars in the cluster, the timing of this discovery in relation to the Whitfield case remains an unsettling coincidence. In 1994, construction workers expanding a forestry road near the former Whitfield property discovered a sealed glass vessel buried approximately 4 feet underground. Inside was a perfectly preserved document written in what forensic handwriting experts identified as Jeremiah Whitfield's script. The document, dated September 10, 1869, just 2 days before his death, contained what appeared to be final instructions for the upcoming alignment ritual. Most disturbing was a passage outlining contingency plans. Should resistance emerge among any of the vessels, replacements must be secured. The alignment cannot be postponed another 28 years. The stellar gateway opens regardless of human readiness. Better an imperfect transmission than none at all. I have identified suitable alternatives in Eminence and West Plains should the need arise. This discovery prompted historians to review census records from surrounding communities in the months following the Whitfield incident. Notably, no disappearances of women were reported in the region during that period, suggesting Whitfield's contingency plans were never implemented, either because the vessels cooperated or because events took an unexpected turn on the night of September 12th. The forest has reclaimed most of the Whitfield property now. Trees grow through what was once the foundation of the house. The creek has changed its course slightly over the decades of seasonal flooding. But certain alignments persist in the landscape, immovable features that continue to mark the pattern of the 7 sisters in the earth as they do in the sky above. And every 28 years, when the sun rises in perfect alignment with where the central window once stood, park rangers report an unusual silence in the forest, as if the natural world itself is holding its breath, waiting. In 2001, geologist Dr. Sarah Fleming conducted a comprehensive geological survey of the area as part of an environmental impact study. Her report noted an unusual characteristic of the soil at 7 specific points corresponding to the former locations of the 7 windows. Soil samples from these 7 locations show inexplicable electromagnetic properties not present in surrounding areas. Each location exhibits a distinct electromagnetic signature, yet all 7 form what appears to be a harmonically related sequence. Most curious is that these electromagnetic anomalies intensify during the hours surrounding dawn, particularly on clear days, suggesting some interaction with solar radiation. The phenomenon has no obvious geological explanation. The case of Jeremiah Whitfield and his 7 daughters remains officially classified as a historical murder, followed by the disappearance of potential suspects. Unofficially, it has become part of the darker folklore of the Ozarks, a reminder that some obsessions transcend rational explanation, and some patterns, once established, continue to exert their influence long after those who created them have departed. In 2005, documentary filmmaker Martin Creeley attempted to produce a historical investigation of the Whitfield case. His production notes, filed with the Missouri Film Commission, described numerous equipment malfunctions when filming at the site. Cameras would inexplicably lose power at specific locations, particularly near the remains of the eastern wall. Most disturbing was the discovery that footage filmed through the remaining window frames contained unexplained light anomalies not visible to the naked eye. 7 distinct spectra that, when analyzed, matched the spectroscopic signatures of the 7 main stars in the Pleiades cluster. Creeley abandoned the project after 3 weeks, citing unsustainable production conditions and crew discomfort. To this day, locals avoid the area where the 7-windowed house once stood, particularly around dawn. Audio recordings captured what sound engineers described as mathematical whispers, faint female voices reciting what appear to be astronomical calculations. As one elderly resident of eminence told a folklore researcher in 1972, some places hold echoes of what happened there, and some echoes are best left unheard. A 2008 study by the Missouri Paranormal Research Society yielded ambiguous results. Team leader Marcus Davidson reported, "While we detected no conventional evidence of paranormal activity, our equipment registered unusual phenomena specific to the 7 window locations. Temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic field variations, and audio anomalies followed a predictable pattern, rotating among the 7 sites in 42-minute intervals, completing a full cycle every 4 hours and 54 minutes, precisely the time the Pleiades is visible above the horizon at this latitude. Whether this represents some form of residual energy or simply unusual geophysical properties remains undetermined. The 7 windows of Whitfield Manor no longer exist in physical form, but the spaces they once occupied remain. 7 precisely aligned absences, framing the rising sun every 28 years, measuring out a celestial calendar whose purpose died with Jeremiah Whitfield. Or perhaps, as the hidden message in the journal suggests, that purpose merely waits for its next alignment, its next manifestation, its next 7 watchers. In 2009, during the most recent 28-year alignment, astronomy professor Dr. Nicholas Chen led a small team of graduate students to document the event. Their research paper, published in the Journal of Archaeoastronomy, confirmed the remarkable precision of Whitfield's calculations. The sun rose in perfect alignment with the central window opening at exactly 6:17:28 a.m., just as Whitfield's calculations from 1869 predicted. For approximately 42 seconds, sunlight passed through all 7 window openings in a specific sequence, creating what appeared to be a focused beam at the center of the former structure. The mathematical precision required to calculate this alignment using 19th century methods is extraordinary, suggesting Whitfield possessed astronomical knowledge beyond what was typical for his era. Chen's team also documented an unexpected phenomenon. During the 42-second alignment, our equipment recorded 7 distinct temperature zones within the foundation perimeter, each differing by exactly 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit from adjacent zones. These temperature differentials formed a pattern matching the relative luminosity ratios of the 7 main stars in the Pleiades cluster. This phenomenon has no conventional scientific explanation. Local historian Margaret Holloway has maintained a collection of anecdotal accounts from hikers, rangers, and locals who have encountered unusual phenomena at the Whitfield site. These include reports of atmospheric distortions viewed through the empty window frames, the sound of women's voices reciting numbers in unison, and watches or other timepieces malfunctioning in the vicinity, often stopping at 6:17 a.m., regardless of when they were checked. While such accounts lack scientific verification, their consistency over decades suggests a persistent folklore tradition surrounding the location. A 2015 archaeological survey, conducted with ground-penetrating radar, revealed additional anomalies beneath the former house foundation. Dr. Thomas Reynolds, who led the survey, reported, "We discovered what appears to be a secondary foundation layer approximately 8 feet below the known cellar level. This deeper structure predates the Whitfield house by many decades, possibly representing an earlier attempt to establish a structure at this astronomically significant location." More curious was the discovery of a chamber directly beneath where the central window once stood, containing what imaging suggests is a stone pillar or column aligned with magnetic north. This feature does not appear to be natural and would have required significant effort to position at this depth. The next perfect alignment will occur on September 13, 2037. Perhaps then, the final answers to the mystery of the 7 windows will emerge from the morning mist of the Ozarks. Until that day, the case remains one of the most disturbing and enigmatic chapters in Missouri's hidden history. In recent years, the Whitfield case has attracted renewed attention from researchers studying the intersection of astronomy, psychology, and cult dynamics. Dr. Eleanor Voss, a psychiatric historian at Washington University, proposed in a 2018 paper that the Whitfield situation represented a perfect storm of astronomical obsession, charismatic manipulation, and isolated environmental conditions, creating an escalating cycle of control and delusion. Voss suggested that what likely began as an intellectual pursuit gradually transformed into something more sinister as Whitfield's mental state deteriorated. Her analysis of his writings indicated a progressive belief that he was receiving direct celestial communication through astronomical observations, eventually convincing himself that the Pleiades cluster was attempting to establish a terrestrial presence through human vessels. This delusion, reinforced by the isolation of the Ozarks setting and his complete control over his female students, created conditions for what modern psychiatry would classify as a shared psychotic disorder. The women's journals suggest an initial willingness to participate in astronomical research, Voss wrote, followed by increasing doubt and resistance as Whitfield's demands became more extreme. The underground chambers likely represented a transition from voluntary participation to forced confinement as the women attempted to resist or escape. What remains unexplained, however, is the mathematical precision of Whitfield's astronomical calculations, the elaborate terrestrial mirroring of the Pleiades constellation in the landscape, and, of course, the ultimate fate of the 7 women. If they indeed killed Whitfield and escaped, no record of their subsequent lives has ever been discovered. If they perished on the property, who arranged their bodies in the creek bed in such a precise pattern? And what explains the recurring phenomena at the 28-year intervals? Shannon County historical records note a curious addendum. In the months following the Whitfield incident, 7 women matching the general description of the daughters registered for classes at 7 different women's colleges across the United States, from Massachusetts to California. Each registered under a different surname, yet all listed their previous education as private study in astronomical sciences. By 1875, all 7 had graduated with degrees in mathematics, astronomy, or related sciences. By 1880, all had disappeared from public records. Dr. Marcus Davidson, the paranormal researcher who studied the site in 2008, offered perhaps the most poetic, if unscientific, assessment. Some places become thin points between worlds, not through supernatural forces, but through the sheer intensity of human obsession focused on a single purpose over time. Whatever Whitfield believed he was accomplishing with his 7 windows and 7 women, he created something that continues to reverberate through that landscape. The windows framed not just the rising sun, but a particular human madness, the belief that with sufficient precision, the heavens could be brought to earth. The Whitfield property remains public land, technically accessible, though unmarked on official forest maps. Those who find their way to the 7 window openings often report a sense of being simultaneously watched and beckoned. The frames, now mere gaps in a crumbling stone wall, still stand in perfect alignment with the rising sun, and every 28 years with the Pleiades constellation. As September 13, 2037 approaches, interest in the site will undoubtedly increase. Astronomers, historians, and the merely curious will make their way to those 7 empty frames in the Missouri wilderness. They will stand where 7 women once stood, watching the dawn through windows built by a man obsessed with the stars. And perhaps in that moment when the sun aligns perfectly with the central opening, they may glimpse what Whitfield sought so desperately to capture, the moment when heaven and earth appear, briefly to touch. Until that day comes, the 7 windows remain, not as physical objects, but as absences, frames around empty space, defining what is missing rather than what remains. In that sense, they have become the perfect monument to the Whitfield mystery itself, a story defined more by what we do not know than by what we do. The forest continues to grow around the ruins. The creek still flows past the circular pattern of buried stones. And in the Pleiades cluster, 400 light-years from Earth, 7 stars shine, unaware of the obsession they once inspired in a remote Ozark valley, an obsession that transformed astronomical observation into something far darker, a pursuit that left 7 windows gazing eastward, waiting for the perfect dawn.